We got part 4 of World War I of our 9-part series that we're doing.
We're making our way through.
It's been mind-blowing that we've gotten to thus far.
Very eye-opening.
Three parts, very, very eye-opening, as Sam said. And we're doing today 1916 Battle of the Somme, and no idea what to expect. Although I think they did mention it in the last video.
I think they did too.
So I don't know if that was the beginnings of it. And
I think they had mentioned like sending men there, and it had started some issues.
Started percolating a little bit, and interestingly enough, I don't recall ever hearing this name, Battle of Somme.
It doesn't sound familiar to me.
There are like certain places I do remember being discussed with World War I, but this isn't one of them thus far. So
yeah, it doesn't ring any bells for me either.
But as Sam alluded to, big learning experience thus far, eye-opening, industrialization, engineering, different weapons being used, the amount of people, the amount of countries.
How widespread, everything was.
All that's been eye-opening. So let's see if there's more eye-opening stuff in this one. I'm looking forward to part 4. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's go. July 1st.
1916. Europe is in the grips of the most destructive conflict yet known, World War I. Much of the fiercest fighting takes place on the Western Front, where British, French and German armies are locked in a bloody stalemate along 450 miles of trenches. There have been millions of casualties, but neither side can break the deadlock. The combination of barbed wire, machine guns and heavy artillery means troops trying to cross no man's land, the open ground between the trenches, are slaughtered en masse. The advantage is always with the defender. But the Allies are committed to more attacks. They're determined to liberate the parts of France and Belgium that were occupied by Germany in the first months of the war. The British and French have agreed to launch a joint offensive in the summer of 1916. But the Germans strike first. In February, they launch a massive assault on the French fortress city of Verdun. Its defense requires all available French reserves. So the summer offensive will be led by the British, their biggest attack of the war so far. Its chief aim now, to relieve pressure on the French at Verdun.
Looks like they're carrying bagpipes there, huh?
Yeah.
That's interesting. You can
And
see
a drum.
You can see why it's a big part of the tradition, right? That, they were even using it during war
It's
times.
even like I remember, all the way through school, whenever we were having kind of remembrance about veterans, there's always bagpipes used in the music.
Valid point.
The attack will take place along a 25-mile front near the River Somme in July.
It's named after a river.
The new British commander, General Sir Douglas Haig, would prefer to attack near Ypres, where there are clearer strategic objectives. But the Somme is where the British and French armies meet, so where a joint offensive must take place. He would also prefer to wait until his inexperienced divisions have received more training. But the French need his help now. The Somme has so far been a quiet sector, allowing the Germans to build up strong defensive positions. Here the Germans have 2 formidable defensive lines, with a third under construction. Each consists of 3 lines of trenches, fire, support, and reserve, connected by communication trenches. They bristle with machine gun positions, and are anchored on fortified villages and strongpoints. In front of the trenches, there are thick belts of barbed wire. Below are dugouts, some 10 meters deep, to shelter German troops from artillery fire. Telephone lines buried 6 feet deep, allow troops at the front to communicate with artillery batteries during an attack.
That's wild.
The German troops that hold the line are well trained, and most are combat veterans. The offensive will be led by the British Fourth Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Sir Henry Rawlinson. With Haig, he draws up the plan of attack. To overcome the Germans' formidable defences, the British will carry out a massive, week-long artillery bombardment with 1,400 guns. This is expected to destroy German barbed wire, flatten trenches, and kill their occupants. 19 mines are also dug under key German strongpoints and filled with explosive, ready to detonate just before the attack begins. To the north, the British Third Army will make a diversionary attack at Gommecourt. The 16 British and French infantry divisions are then expected to take their objectives with minimal opposition.
I got a feeling it's not going to go
This way.
the way they're anticipating.
Yeah.
It's wild as well. I say that like every single video. I'm like, it's wild, it's crazy, because everything in these videos is that. But everything is done manually, right? The telephone lines that they were just talking about, digging the telephone lines.
It's crazy
so
that they
can
even did that.
communicate. Then the mines that they just talked about, filling them with explosive. We obviously are seeing them walk everywhere, right? Because nowadays they just drop you off of a plane, or you'd have armored vehicles or whatever. They were just coming up with tanks at this time, right? So everybody's got to walk everywhere, and like I said, you got to dig everything
Think about
by
also,
hand.
right? Like everybody has to walk, which means they're physically more active, which means they probably need more food to survive and stuff like that. Also, like to dig the trenches to begin with.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and all the pathways and the underground tunnels and stuff, like how much labor that is.
Just the intricacy of the battlefield that we saw between the barbed wire and the different placements.
So I mean, like
of
somebody would have to
everything.
put all that up.
Yeah, and even the visual that I get, you see the pictures, but the visual that I have, it's like literally hell on earth. You just have like this barbed wire fencing, and like it's just these trenches and the mud, and it's like
like these underground tunnels and stuff.
I can only visualize and imagine, like an outsider's point of view of how an environment that must have been.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just that's what I mean when I say it's wild.
Yeah.
The 16 British and French infantry divisions are then expected to take their objectives with minimal opposition. The attack will begin at 7:30 a.m. in broad daylight, so the artillery can observe its fire. British morale is high, and the men are confident of victory. Many of the units taking part are PALS battalions, the eager recruits of 1914, now about to face combat for the first time.
Sorry to pause it again, but like one thing I noticed with these pictures as they're walking by, they're smiling. Now, I don't know if they're smiling because, that was the morale that they just talked about in the commentary, or they've been instructed for propaganda purposes. Make sure you guys are smiling while you walk by this camera so that we can all let everybody know back home things are going well and we're winning the war.
Yeah.
I would be curious. I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but I'd be curious, and I would bet it will probably be the latter of the propaganda, because or these guys are just so strong-willed and unbelievably focused that it doesn't matter what environment that they're in, they have a positive attitude about things.
Yeah, it's also interesting because they said that they were super confident that they were going to win this, and that these men, this is the first time they're seeing combat, so they might be going into it thinking like, yeah, we're going to mess these guys up, in our first battle we're going to win, and then it's like, well, we don't know what happened yet, but it's sounding like it's not going to go that way.
We will find out.
Taking part are PALS battalions, the eager recruits of 1914, now about to face combat for the first time. But on the eve of the assault, there are worrying reports that the British bombardment has been only partially successful. 1.6 million shells are fired, but due to inexperienced gun crews, a shortage of heavy guns, and faulty shells, much of the German barbed wire remains intact. German defenders, too, are largely unscathed in their deep dugouts. And from captured prisoners and listening in on uncoded telephone calls, the Germans know exactly when and where the British are coming.
That's not good. I'm getting anxiety already.
The Allied artillery bombardment reaches its peak at 7 a.m. At 7:20, the British detonate an enormous mine under a German strongpoint, the Hawthorne Redoubt, and British troops rush forward to occupy the crater. At 7:28, further mines are detonated under German strongpoints along the front. At 7:30, the Allied bombardment moves on to the German second line, as British and French infantry begin their advance across no man's land. German troops, meanwhile, race up from their dugouts to set up machine guns.
Oh my gosh.
It's an enduring myth that all the British infantry climb out of their trenches and walk steadily towards the German line. A few units do, but most send men out into no man's land before the bombardment lifts, so the final dash toward the enemy line is as short as possible. But in the northern sector, whichever tactics are used, the British are easy targets for German machine gunners, especially where they bunch up to get through the few gaps in the barbed wire. The British infantry advance bravely, but are mown down in their hundreds. Some units do break into the German line. Near Thiepval, the 36th Ulster Division captures the Schwaben Redoubt. But without support on either flank, it's isolated, and the survivors are forced to retreat that night. On their right, the 32nd Division takes the Leipzig Redoubt, while near La Boisselle, the 34th Division captures the Lochnagar mine crater. But these are just small toeholds in the German line, far short of their objectives.
Just briefly, I can only imagine the two sides of the coin, right? They were saying, they were having struggles getting through the barbed wire there because the initial idea between the attack didn't go as planned. So therefore, they were sitting ducks essentially, right? So on the one hand, you have the people that are trying to get through the line, right? And, breach on the attack, the infantrymen. And they're, at the whim of the strategist, right? So the strategist sets up the strategy. If it works well, great. Your men are going to be in a good position to succeed. And if it goes the way it's going in this one, your men are now not in a position at all, and their lives are literally, being basically flushed down the drain, right? And so, that's not, I guess, entirely true because, it seems like this is a war of attrition. It's like the more men that are used is how the war was won. So, I'm just thinking about it like, one, the strategists, they screw up on the strategy. How do they kind of live with themselves knowing that, their miscalculation has cost so many lives? Yeah. Two, the infantrymen, how do they process it being like, this person that told me it was going to go like this was wrong, and now I'm just out to die, and I'm a sitting duck here, right? Yeah. So it's like, I can only imagine just the thought process of this, and dealing with all these constant dominoes of decision makings and how they influence each other.
Yeah, and I think it would have been challenging too, because obviously you'd think the logical thing to do would be like, if step one didn't become successful, which is taking out the barbed wire, then naturally you don't progress to step two, right? You don't want to risk all of these lives and your men in your army for something that didn't even go the way that it was supposed to in step one. But at this time, it's like, how would they've even gotten that mass communication across, right? It'd be like they would just be ready to go on their step at the time they were told to do it, regardless if it worked or not, right?
You wouldn't know until you're trying to cross the barbed wire what it was probably
exactly like, that it was
right?
still there, and then you're like, wait a minute, why is this even like this?
Well, that's what I mean, right? Like if you're the infantryman that's at that point at the barbed wire. There's only one place to go, and you're thinking like, wait, we have to get through there. That's the only place we can go, and there's machine guns that are set up looking at that. It's like, well, this is great, you know, and you just have to go and do it. Basically, it's wild.
Yeah.
In World War I, one of the greatest challenges faced by commanders is getting accurate information about the course of the battle. Reliable field radios haven't been invented yet. Telephone lines are regularly cut by shell fire. So officers must turn to messengers, flag signals, light signals, even homing pigeons. None of which is completely reliable. To get around this problem, during an attack, supporting artillery works to a fixed timetable, moving their fire onto the next line of enemy defences at a set time. So when the infantry start their attack, gunners adjust their fire onto the second line of enemy defences. But if the infantry get held up, the supporting fire keeps moving on according to the timetable. The infantry get left behind and are at the mercy of enemy machine guns. Aerial observation by balloon.
So I feel like this is kind of what I was just saying with the communication, right? Like it's like the communication is really the stronghold here of like whether you're going to be successful or not.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Wild.
Balloons and aircraft can provide valuable information, but rely on good weather and control of the skies. This is why, on the 1st of July, it takes British commanders hours, even days, to find out which attacks have been successful and which have failed. This makes it extremely difficult for them to react to the situation with any speed. Further south, there is much greater success. Despite heavy losses, the 21st and 7th Divisions take Mametz and cut off the heavily defended village of Fricourt, which the Germans abandon overnight. On their right, the 18th and 30th Divisions take their objectives, including the village of Montauban, which is secure by 11 a.m. Alongside them, the veteran French 20th Corps also takes its first-day objectives, as well as 2,500 German prisoners. The Germans didn't expect the offensive to extend so far south, and are less well prepared. And, crucially, the Allied bombardment is boosted by French heavy guns, which are much more effective at destroying barbed wire and German strongpoints. At 9:30 a.m., French colonial troops lead the attack south of the Somme River. The French seize all their objectives and take 3,000 more prisoners. Despite success in the south, the first day of the Battle of the Somme is a costly failure for the British. German losses for the day are estimated at 12,000 men. The French lose 7,000. But the British suffer a staggering 57,000 casualties.
Jesus.
1/3 of them killed. The 1st of July, 1916, becomes the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. And it's just the first day in a battle that rages for another 4 months, finally ending in November amid freezing rain and mud. By then, the Allies have advanced 10 miles at a cost of 430,000 British casualties, 200,000 French casualties, and 450,000 German.
1 million.
It makes the Battle of the Somme one of the bloodiest in history.
That's crazy.
In British popular memory, the Somme is remembered as an unmitigated disaster and tragedy, evidence of the incompetence of British generals and the pointless sacrifice of the gallant soldiers under their command. But to those who fought it and those at home, the Battle of the Somme was seen as a success. Casualties were enormous and hard to bear, But across Europe, every warring nation was suffering terrible losses, as all commanders struggled to find an answer to trench warfare. And at the Somme, the British had not only helped save their French ally, who went on to defeat the Germans at Verdun, but learned vital lessons about how to fight on the Western Front. Most of all, the Battle of the Somme had been a costly but necessary wearing down of the German army, an immensely painful but vital step on the long road to victory. Maps and research for this video come from Osprey Publishing's Campaign series. Every Osprey book examines a particular battle, campaign, or combat unit in authoritative, meticulous detail. And with more than 3,000 titles, they cover everything from ancient warfare to modern conflict. Visit their website to see their online catalogue. Epic History TV depends on donations from its fans through its Patreon page. Please click the link to find out how you can pledge as little as $1 per video.
And Epic History does a fantastic job with these videos.
Yeah, they really do.
The music, the narration, the details.
I was gonna say so detailed,
knowledge.
But also in a way that keeps you captivated and interested in the story.
Yeah, great storytelling at that, right? And obviously unfortunate storytelling with the Battle of Somme.
Yeah, I think one thing I didn't really think about before, like, and he kind of highlighted on the end, and while it's absolutely horrific that many people died, in a battle like this, when you're fighting in a way that hasn't really been done before, it's like you have to try and see what works to see what works and what doesn't. And unfortunately, that's always going to be at the cost of lives. Mm-hmm. So it's like there's not really any other way around it other than just shooting and hoping for the basket. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I was saying about the strategic component, right? Like you're trying to devise a strategy that's hopefully going to work. But if it doesn't, how many lives are going to be lost? It's a lot of pressure. Right.
I think this is I could be wrong, but I think this is the first time that they were actually fighting with trench warfare, though. No. So like this whole thing, I think, was like new to them.
Well, in the World War One, yeah, but I don't think this battle itself was. The first time.
No. But I just mean like, you know, when they're trying to plan this size of an attack, and there hasn't been one like this thus far, and this is their first war of getting used to trench warfare. I feel like a lot of it was probably trial and error for them.
Yeah, I think that there were other situations probably, but I think, like you said, the size of the scale. Also, I think this is in particular as they were alluding to big losses for the British, which they hadn't experienced.
Yeah.
Which you saw that, right? The French on the southern portion, although they had alluded to the Germans not being as well prepared for it, played a big role. It seemed like the French were more organized and they were probably more experienced.
Yeah. And also had the guns that could get through what they needed.
Well, yeah, but the problem with the gunning, I think they said in the beginning on the British side, was that they weren't doing it the proper way.
Yeah, like not trained properly.
Right. So the French probably had similar artillery, but were using it as they should have from the experience. And I could be wrong about that. Maybe like you said, the difference of the guns on each side might have played a role as well. But
who knows?
My point was just that the French clearly executed the strategy better and reduced their losses substantially. Yeah. Right. Whereas you had the strategy, just a few dominoes that fell kind of pushed the whole thing underwater, and it cost them dearly. And you know, that could have been largely due to the first time recruits that were taking part in
weren't trained properly,
such a young. Difficult scenario that you were alluding to that hadn't been used very often. So it was very eye-opening to learn about this, and just go through the thought process, like I said, of the individuals and the countries, and as he alluded to as well, you know, the role that this probably played in the rest of the war. Yeah. Because they're like, okay, we don't want that to happen again.
Yeah. And like you said, it really did wear down the Germans, and, you know, it's like all of this is going to play into the next steps. Yeah.
I think I just struggle with the idea, the cost, right? Like, you know, as you said, it's got to be done to achieve the result you're trying to get. But to me, I always come back to at what cost. And I would really, really personally struggle with that idea of like literally sacrificing people for that objective.
Yep.
You know, it's like that's the ultimate cost. Human life is the ultimate cost.
Yeah.
Like, what are you fighting for if you're sacrificing everybody's lives, right? What's the opposite if you don't fight, right? So it's like, do things end up being worse? Probably. But then you have to weigh the trade-offs, and that's what I feel like I try to put myself in that position.
Yeah.
And I struggle with seeing how to deal with it, but obviously people had to. At the time, they had no other choice.
Yeah, and I think the thing, like I said, that still stands out the most to me in this whole thing, which is just so mind-blowing, is that just the lack of communication ability, and then how that plays into everything else. Like they also said later on in this that they couldn't even respond as quickly to what was happening because they didn't know. It took days to even find out what had happened, right? Yeah. Like they literally showed carrier pigeons. So it's like, I mean, obviously it's been a long time, but here we are 100 years, more than 100 years later. And it's like the speed at which some of these attacks can be carried out back to back and coordinated across different places in the world is so different because of the communication improvements, right?
Well, it's I think communication, yes, but information, I think, is the other aspect. Is
well, I mean, for when I say communication, I mean like the delivery of the information, like the speed at which you can deliver.
Yeah, but I was just going to say information is knowledge, right? So the reason why a strategy may work or may not is having the information to make the decision, the right decision or the wrong decision. So today, in today's world, it's just interesting because information, we know how valuable it is, right? People that have information versus the people that don't, and they can make the decisions on that, whatever aspect of life, but clearly in combat will have a much higher probability of success. So it just highlights, though, like if you're in a conflict of any sort, it's World War I, World War II, whatever it is, if you have an information advantage, you know, and if you have the technology like radar, for example, that gives you an information advantage, it can be absolutely altering towards the outcome.
Well, yeah. Well, think about like just the difference between you having a combat radio and like you can like radio down the road to somebody who just did their attack on an outpost and you're doing on yours and you're like, how did yours go? How did ours go? Are we going to meet over there together? Versus like having to wait 3 days to know if the person beside you got through or not, right?
Anyways,
like,
guys, we've been rambling for too long. Every time we do one of these videos, we go on a little bit of a conversational rant, which I have enjoyed because it really does stoke some great conversations. So hopefully you guys are enjoying it as much as we are, and make sure you tune in for our next release of this next video in the series. We're gonna have part 5 coming next week, so we're doing a little series on a series here. So we'd love to have you stay tuned for that. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if this is your first time coming around. We're gonna have the previous videos in a playlist, so you can go back and catch the previous ones if this is your first one. But hopefully you come around and check out more of our videos by hitting that subscribe button. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching. See you the next one.